Well, life changed for everyone in and around Israel and Gaza a year ago, and that includes those not involved in attacks but just living in the theater of gunfire. Joining us now is Layla Al-Haddad. She is an activist and a journalist as well. And what's unique is that she has family who lives in Gaza. With her perspective now, let's talk a little bit. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about your family first, and I'm curious of how they are. You have some, you said aunts and uncles there, and tell me what life is like for them right now.
It's been an absolute nightmare of a year for them and for us on this end as well. Those who haven't been killed, I mean, just a few days ago, an entire family from my mother's side, the entire family was completely killed. Their building was destroyed, bombed by the Israelis. I've had over 100 members of my family killed by the Israeli military over the past year. But those who haven't been killed are just really struggling to survive right now. If they're not displaced for the 8th or 9th time, they're struggling just to feed themselves, thinking about their futures. All of the universities have been destroyed. And really, just as I said, struggling to survive just to make ends meet. And it's been hard. I mean, seeing everything that I knew, Gaza is where I call home, where my parents were born and raised, where I lived many years of my life, and seeing all of it destroyed in very early last year, 12 months ago, live streamed, was not easy. Everything in Gaza that sustains life, as I like to say, whether they were universities or theaters or places of healing like hospitals or places of worship like churches and mosques or farms, all of that was destroyed pretty systematically over the course of many months. So they're doing as best as can be expected. And, my job is to just continuously check in on them, try to advocate on their behalf. But, they feel like the world has largely just ignored them, that they're invisible at this point. Gaza is a place, just by perspective, that's roughly the size of Glen Burnie. Glen Burnie, I think, has 70,000 people, right? Gaza has 2 million people. But imagine a place like Glen Burnie completely closed off from every angle, right? That the people there are not allowed to leave or come in or out, move freely without the permission of an outside authority. That's what it's been like for Gaza for decades. And despite all that, I still like to remind people that Gaza endures because of the resolve and determination of its people. They really don't like to complain. I'm talking here about my family, but anyone else that I've interviewed over the past year for various articles, they just like to say to me, and, I just spoke with a young 21-year-old college student, and she's really lost everything. She's living in a tent with her family, inspiring mechanical engineer. And she said, people often think we need the world, but I really think the world needs us because we're the world's moral compass right now. And it's time for everyone to kind of evaluate their humanity. That was her message kind of to the world.
You mentioned a couple things that come to mind, and humanity and humanitarianism is part of it. You talk about the intersection of food and politics a lot in your work. How does that apply to what we see or what your family is experiencing right now?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. For a very long time, Israel has systematically sought to target, destroy, and control the food system, not only of Gaza, but I would say more broadly of all of the occupied Palestinian territories. But this is particularly glaring in Gaza. And it kind of went into, it was accelerated, I would say, into high gear over the past 12 months, where they deliberately sought to target anything that was productive. So they destroyed over 90% of the greenhouses, more than half of the agricultural infrastructure in the farms, all of the livestock, the fishing fleet, and so on. And then they sought, and this is according, to many a report, USAID and others told Secretary of State Blinken, as you saw in the Intercept report, that Israel was deliberately blocking humanitarian aid and food into Gaza. In other words, weaponizing food, using food as a weapon of war. And that was something, that was made clear early on when Gallant said, very early on, exactly a year ago, we will ban the entry of fuel, water, food, and electricity. And that's exactly what they did. And what I found is that, again, because of their just resolve and their determination, they insist on finding a way to feed themselves anyway. So even though in one of the hardest months in February, where speaking with my own cousins who are still in the north of Gaza and Gaza City right now, many of them were having to use animal feed to bake bread of, unleavened bread out of, because there was simply nothing for them to eat, or just forage for weeds like mallow and purslane and things that we might find growing in the sidewalks of Baltimore.
I spoke with Ben Cardin and also with Howard Libet as well. Is there an idea that a two-state system can exist? Is there an idea, do you see it in your head when you think of Gaza? Can that happen after all we've been through at this point?
Absolutely. I'm going to answer this in two ways.
Okay.
One is that ultimately it's up for the Palestinians themselves to decide what the shape of their future state looks like, whether that's a one-state scenario where all people living in that land have equal rights, whether it's Jewish Israelis or Palestinian Arabs or Christians or others, or a two-state solution, right? That's up for them to decide. But I will say none of that will be possible as long as the United States continues to facilitate this genocide and enable the Israeli occupation as they are currently doing. They've sent $18 billion since October. That's not sending a message of peace, of two states. That's sending a message that you can act without any accountability, you being the Israeli government, and continue to do whatever you want, right? That nothing matters, that instead of international norms, breaking international norms has become the norm, unfortunately, as we've seen in the past 12 months, whether it's by way of starvation or genocide or executing civilians or targeting hospitals or schools. We, as the United States, are sending the wrong message. If it's two states we want, then we need to stop arming and financing Israel.
All right, Ms. El-Haddad, good to meet you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Certainly. Take care.